stronger, bigger and better. Join us every Thursday 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. as we discuss matters of patriotism here on NTV.
Watching Morning at NTV.
Good morning and welcome back to Morning at NTV. My name is Idris Matusegawa and we have entered our Kickstarter segment of the show where we talk about issues that affect you at home and the top headlines around the country. Now, previously we've seen a video from one writer, Kankweza, who came out to say that he's been tortured by government, and recently when he went to court asking for his passport, he was denied. There is demand for action over torture allegations in the country, and in studio I have Oscar Kihika, the legal director, NRM, and Sarah Birete, ED, Center for Constitutional Governance, to discuss this issue and more. Good morning.
Good morning to you.
I'll start with you, Sarah. Could you tell us about Center for Constitutional Governance? What do you do? What is your mandate?
Well, Center for Constitutional Governance is a constitutional watchdog registered to do work in promoting constitutionalism and providing, from the civil society perspective, checks and balances around implementation of the Constitution in Uganda. So that's, in simple terms, our mandate, a constitutional watchdog. Yeah.
Brilliant. I'll come to you, Oscar Kihika. You are the legal director in NRM. We've seen this video. Its evidence is plain to see. Where do we go from here?
Well, your question is a bit loaded and maybe misleading. Yes, I'm the director NRM of a party.
Yes.
You need to separate the party from government. So I'm not a member of government. I'm just a member of the ruling party. And there's a difference. Now, the Kakwenza saga is but it's quite disturbing. Let me start with the basics. Number one, our constitution is extremely clear. It has a chapter on the rights of the citizens. And one of those rights, which are inalienable, is that every citizen of Uganda is protected from torture. Because that's what this whole thing is all about. It's a human rights issue. And from what I've been following in the news, what has happened to Kakwenza and others, because it's not just about him, recently I've been seeing accused persons being brought before court, and the state of their health has really been disturbing. The images that are coming through have been disturbing. As a party, now let me speak for the party that I advise. As a party, we have been on record and that we do not condone such activities. The people that do this are mandated to protect the lives of the citizen, and they are protected to ensure that the rights of the citizenry are protected. So when we see images such as this, we obviously feel concerned. It's concerning. What ought to be done? The chairman of our party, and therefore His Excellency, as you will recall, I think in the court sometime towards the end of last year, came out very clear when he made a statement that torture is unacceptable and that those who do so should be held to account. He's on record for having said that. There are indeed processes and procedures which are put in place by the Constitution and the law to address such occurrences when they do occur. It is incumbent upon those in authority and those responsible for executing those provisions of the law to take action, just so that we continue having proper governance of the citizenry in this country. Those are my views.
And Mr. Ariete, Mr. Oscar has just mentioned that the president came out and talked against torture. The constitution exists. But again, we find ourselves here where victims are coming out and they are claiming and they are showing evidence that they have been tortured. And nothing is done. And most of the politicians and policymakers who come out to speak against this, the first thing they mention is the constitution. We have a chapter that is against torture. The president has said this, but then after that, same thing happens. Why is this reoccurring day after day?
We don't just have a constitution, as much as it's the overriding law, and in Article 24 it's very explicit on prohibiting torture, cruel treatment, degrading, and inhuman treatment of any person in Uganda. We also have the Prohibition and Prevention of Torture Act and the Human Rights Enforcement Act. But we are also signatory to the International Convention Against Torture and the African Charter on Human and People's Rights as Uganda. Yes, the president did make that statement after elections. But before elections, he had made a contradictory statement after the fracas in Arua, where he said that, I was told an MP was beaten, and I asked for a clip, and I saw he was beaten properly. He's on record. Yes, a change of heart is good, but as a president, his job is not just to talk. He's the commander-in-chief of the security forces, meaning that he is directly responsible for the acts and conduct of security agencies in this country. That's why he has that title, Commander-in-Chief. He's not just the president, Commander-in-Chief of the security forces. These Ugandans that have faced torture have faced it in the hands of the security forces that he commands. Where is the action? What is he commanding as the commander-in-chief? What has he done beyond talk? The English say talk is cheap. Anybody can talk. But leaders are judged on their actions, not on their talk. So where is the action against torture by our president? I don't see it. On several occasions, we have had situations where he even promotes people directly implicated in torture himself. You can mention the Major General Reru. You can mention, the list is endless. People are implicated in torture. There is evidence. He promotes them. What message does it send? That whoever is interested in promotions should torture people. We have had a situation after the 18-19 November killings in Kampala. An investigative documentary by an international media house, BBC, just investigated 3 murders and produced evidence of who, where, and how people were killed. The police instead summoned journalists who wrote about a BBC documentary. Is that action of a leadership that is against torture? I do not think so. Our leadership condones torture. They pay lip service to torture.
Mr. Kihika, you under the legal department, a legal director, contradictory statements can put you in trouble under the law.
Not necessarily. You see, I need to. Like when you ask me the question, you see, I need to remind you that I advise the party. Okay, I don't advise government. That is
Yes.
it's
quite clear.
That is the purview. That's the purview of the Attorney General.
Yes.
So, as a legal advisor to the party, okay, I'll reiterate what I stated before. But coming to the comments that my friend Sarah has made, yes, the head of state is the commander-in-chief. However, you all know that under the laws that we have presently, there are mechanisms within the institutions which are prescribed for situations such as this, where there have been acts taken by individual members of the forces, of the security organs. There are processes under which individuals can be brought to book. I hear what she's saying, that these processes have not been initiated. And it's a reflection of what we sometimes also state. Look, if a member of the security forces, okay, does go beyond the law, especially when they are treating citizens of the country, I think it's important and it's imperative upon those institutions to initiate the necessary steps. Indeed, some processes have been initiated, and a couple of errant officers have actually been charged and sanctioned, even though in the mind of the public, perhaps the sanction did not go far enough. Okay, but nevertheless, the processes had been initiated. It is important as citizens that we keep reminding those in charge of these institutions that they ought to comply with what the law states in as far as treatment of suspects is concerned. Because this is a non-derogable, non-negotiable issue. And that's why the Constitution, that chapter of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, you know, is really entrenched, okay, and is not subject to amendment. Because you see, you have to remember why it is there. I think Sarah mentioned it. In the first place, we're signatories to the Human Rights Charter, which was passed in 1948, albeit before we came into being as a nation. But we nevertheless signed on to it. You've got to recall the history of this country, which culminated ultimately in the 1995 Constitution. That Constitution was supposed to address these particular abuses that were being wantonly committed prior to the 1995 Constitution. And therefore, and that's why I keep on mentioning the Constitution, okay, we have to remind ourselves that we are here because of a certain past, okay, and the aspiration of our people is to ensure that the past does not repeat itself. Now, when you see, fortunately, you see in Uganda, fortunately, there are processes which are being, by and large, observed. However, the concern of late is people who are being subject to these processes are being treated outside those parameters, and the people that are handling them should be brought to account and to book. Okay, and I think it is necessary, it is imperative that the people responsible should be, the investigations should take place and people be brought to account. Okay, you see, the thing is this: when the job of the security agencies, right, is not an easy one, okay, but it has to be understood that their primary responsibility is to protect the citizens and protect the rights of the citizen. Now, in the case of Kakwenza, because this is where it was focused, because it's the current it's the current topic for discussion. But there were some previous things. Now, in the case of Kakwenza, in the first place, he went and allegedly committed it's an offense. I think cyber, whatever, bullying and stuff like that. And yeah, he obviously had to face the law once somebody complained about his actions. He's not above the law, okay? That has to be understood. He's not above the law.
Definitely.
Okay? So, having been subjected to the law, okay, his treatment as a suspect, okay, ought to have been done in a manner that is prescribed by the law. And that's why we're having this discussion, okay? So it's important that the citizens of this country still have confidence in the institutions that execute, those provisions of the law. Okay, so that the state at all times, when it is trying to maintain order in society, must be mindful of the fact that the rights of the citizens must be respected.
Mr. Kihika, you've mentioned about different aspects of getting down on the table and having discussions. Then you've reiterated how the law is in existence and how things should be done. But in the end, things are not done the way they should be done. And I'll come to you, sir. From the example he has given, Kankweza committed an offense. Under the law, he would be summoned, taken to court, there's proceedings happen, and then he's probably given a punishment that is adequate to the law breaking that he has committed. But that didn't happen. He was taken, tortured, then commanded to apologize in a movie kind of scenario. Why is this happening, and why are we having these conversations over and over again? Are the people committing these acts not aware of the law, or do they deliberately just ignore it and say we are untouchable, you'll do nothing if we do this?
This country has, to a larger extent, good laws, save for the laws that affect civic space.
Yeah.
People are aware of the laws, but we treat laws as a mere piece of paper. We lack the culture of rule of law. We lack the culture of constitutionalism. And unfortunately, in Uganda, since independence, the relationship between the state and the constitution has been abusive, right from independence. We are going to celebrate 6 decades of independence. We are still at the basics of a young country when it comes to constitutionalism, when it comes to rule of law, and this is thanks to the attitude of the leadership where it comes to constitutionalism. It has not started with NRM. Many people thought NRM would end it because that's what they used to preach. And unfortunately, we are back to square one as a country. Very unfortunate. When you look at the history of torture in this country, globally torture was common, in Mesopotamia, Roman Empire. And they would torture slaves and foreigners in those prehistory days. Globally, torture was outlawed in the 19th century. Globally. It's very unfortunate that in the 4th Industrial Revolution, we are seated here discussing basics of treating a human being as a state. And then we say middle income, steady progress, transformation. What have you transformed? When you are decorating citizens' bodies with torture marks every day, what is transformation if you cannot transform the basic life of a human being? What transformation are you talking about? If you cannot transform basics, that every human is born free, and if anybody is suspected You said Kakwenza committed a crime. He is only suspected of committing a crime until proven guilty beyond reasonable doubt. And you want to kill them because they said something. Is that transformation? Is that the meaning of transformation of a country? You cannot abide by your own laws. You cannot check the conduct of security that you command. Direct the command. You cannot check their conduct. Is that transformation of a nation? Then what did you fight against? NRM, led by President Museveni, fought against 3 key issues: a rigged election, a mismanaged economy, and gross violations of human rights. After 36 years, their conduct is worse than what they fought. Is that transformation of a country? I think we need dialogue on torture. We need soul searching. And if the commander-in-chief cannot check the security agencies, then maybe we need a constitutional reform on how to manage security agencies in this country.
Do you think he's deliberately letting this happen?
He knows the truth. He's the one who can answer that question. And when you see him as media, ask him, where is the problem? As a country, we don't want talk. We don't want lip service. Anybody can say anything. If you are a leader, then offer leadership on torture. We don't want anything less. No.
Mr. Oscar Kihika, I'll come back to you. You expressed that the forces have to execute their duties in a way that is going to keep trust in the citizens that their rights are protected. Right now, how can a mwananchi trust that the legal process, that the law will protect them if probably they fall on the bad side of a big shot in government?
You say that's why there are institutions to ensure that the law is complied with. Okay, and all I'm saying is that the good thing is that there is a law in place, right? There is a mechanism in which to address these wrongs, and in fact, I was a bit disappointed. If I may go ahead, I was rather disappointed with the members of parliament in the opposition when they decided to walk out. You see, they are abdicating their duty as the opposition, because that's why they're in parliament, to bring this government to account. They have the power to set up a select committee to investigate these incidences, okay? And yet they have chosen not to. They are supposed to be acting on behalf of the citizen, and they are in a position they know better, okay? So as a citizenry, we should be looking at the institutions, right, to ensure that the provisions of the law relating to torture, you know, are implemented, so to speak. And once they do that, they'll be abdicating their responsibilities. Now, to answer your question, I think there's all reason for the citizens to be confident that their rights will be complied with, provided, because the avenues are there. And you see, the moment you try to apply those avenues and you are not successful, then there's reason to be worried. I don't think we have reached there as yet. The mere fact that we're having this discussion is a very good thing. And it's a reminder to those in charge that they are accountable to the people. Well, let's go to the basics. The power belongs to the people, okay? So they are accountable to us, the people. Otherwise, if they continue behaving in such a manner, a time will come when they're going to be held seriously accountable to it. And this conversation is normal in a democratic society, because you see, you have to have a continuous conversation about constitutional governance. The mere fact the Constitution is about a spirit. This conversation hasn't only happened in Uganda, and I think my sister was being a bit melodramatic. I can understand her emotions, but you see, the thing, it doesn't help to be emotional. It doesn't help to be,
people's lives are not emotional.
No, it doesn't help to be emotional.
Maybe she's just passionate about the issue.
That's the thing. But the thing is that the similar discussions, for example, are continuing to happen. For example, like in the United States, the very words that she was talking about are the very words that you hear the Black Lives Matter talk about. That conversation that is happening in States, you all know that, okay? So and that is hailed as one of the most democratic countries on the planet. So let us use that as although I don't believe that, but let's use them as a yardstick. Again, like I just stated, the very same conversation is happening. People who do not respect people's rights and lives, and they are under scrutiny. They have institutions to protect the rights of those citizens, but those institutions have been very slow, as you know, in enforcing those rights. Okay, as enshrined in the United States Constitution. You have seen crowds come out and demonstrate after courts have made decisions which, in their view, do not protect the rights of the victims, and that is in the States. So we're talking about a conversation that this is a matter of this is an issue that is always prevalent in all societies. It is not perfect. I think what has got to be understood is that the Charter of Human Rights, the Declaration of Human Rights, which was passed in 1948, you see, is an aspiration to an ideal. It's a recognition that these are the rights of a human being that ought to be observed. And you see, historically, that charter was put in place after the horrors that the world witnessed in the Second World War, particularly when the Nazis treated the Jews in the horrific fashion that we all know. Yes. And therefore the world was jolted into putting forth, certain standards again that human beings must be treated. And that's the commitment. It's an ideal, and it's a proper ideal. Just that we treat each other,
in a proper manner.
In a proper manner.
Well, we are going to continue this conversation right after the break. And remember, you can be part of this. Just look out for our social media platforms, that is YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Look for NTV Uganda or myself, Idris Matusegawa, and tell us, what do you think about getting action or demand for action over torture allegations? And what's the situation? We shall be back.
You're watching Morning at NTV.
Glovo is the app that brings you anything you want. Like some crispy chicken.
And welcome back to Morning at NTV. We are talking about torture. What can be done to eradicate this disease that seems to be creeping back into our country? And in studio, I have Oscar Kihika, the legal director, NRM Party, not the government, and Sarah Birete, ED, Center for Constitutional Governance. Now, we were talking about something very interesting, Mr. Oscar Kihika, and I would like you to probably continue that conversation before we came back home?
Yeah, you see, the thing is that we are talking about this particular instance because it has, you know, it has brought a lot of prominence. But today, you see, Kakwenza is just like any other Ugandans. He's not the only one that has been subjected to that treatment. It's just that it happens to be, he happens to be a flashpoint at the moment.
Yeah.
Okay, but you know, the Human Rights Commission was put in place to address those kind of issues, and indeed, he has indeed, the Human Rights Commission has indeed been handling complaints of such a nature, of citizens who do not make the news. Okay, so and that's why I have a problem with this kind of discussions. So why isn't NTV why has NTV not been highlighting the work of Human Rights Commission, which has done, I think, an exceptional job?
We actually have.
Okay. In highlighting, you know, those instances. Okay. Now, the fact that you've got to the Human Rights Commission doing its job means that we have an institution in place, a watchdog, okay, to ensure that the rights of citizens are protected, okay. And indeed, I think even during the Kakwenza saga, you saw them jump into action at the time. So the institutions are in place, and they have got their ears on the ground, and they're actively acting to ensure that the citizens of this country are protected during these processes.
I'll come to you, Sarah. Mr. Kihika says, why are we jumping onto this story? And he confirms that there are NGOs and institutions that keep or protect human rights against human beings against torture. Do you think they have been defeated in their plea to protect the human citizen of Uganda?
Well, it's true that the Human Rights Commission is mandated to protect citizens' rights. And just to remaining on the same case of Kakwenza, because for every situation, there is always a spark. So let's use Kakwenza as a spark to highlight torture in Uganda, which Mr. Chihika confirms has been ongoing and is now part of a prominent culture by security agencies. So Kakwenza case has helped bring it back to the limelight for discussion. So there's nothing wrong with that. But on the same case, we saw Human Rights Commission being denied access. The 2 weeks before Kakwenza was produced in court, Human Rights Commission was denied access to Kakwenza. They moved to Chireka, denied access. Kakwenza was being brought in and out of Chireka on the orders of the military. On 2 occasions, the police tried to bring him to court, and he was grabbed by the military from them. Court issued orders twice. Everybody ignored court orders. We have institutions, yes, but are we respecting institutions? It is all part of the lip service to the human rights agenda, to the plight of Ugandans. Court issued orders twice to produce Kakwenza. Were they respected? No. Court has been granting people bail, and they are kidnapped. We have all witnessed these things. So what institutions are we talking about amidst impunity? And I want also to comment on the issue, you know, the comparison with the United States. It's the most convenient, you know. But let's just pick a few cases.
Yeah.
George Floyd, you know, when he was killed with a police officer bending on his knee, suffocated to death. Weren't the culprits punished? Kiriare. So the issue we are talking about on human rights violations is lack of action. Lack of action to the violators, perpetrators, and then doing the reverse. Somebody has beaten people on a rally. Yes, maybe they've helped you win an election. Instead of punishing them, you promote them. Somebody is kidnapping people. We have citizens missing. You promote the people involved. You promote the heads of agencies involved in kidnapping Ugandans. What message are you sending? Some of these police officers just want promotion. So, if their intention is promotion against serving diligent service to Ugandans, aren't you promoting torture? Because those are the people you promote. Those are the people catching your eye as a leader. What message are you sending? What message are you sending to the people? That when you are beaten, exercising your democratic rights, when you're violated, when you're tear-gassed, those are my guys, and I'll promote them. What message are you sending as a leader?
Mr. Kihika, you've mentioned that there have been cases that have been happening before of torture, before Kankweza's case has come to the limelight. Has this become the new normal? Should we simply believe that torture happens? If it happens, it's the new normal, nothing will be done, let's move on.
No, I don't want to believe that it is a new normal. You see, the thing is that it is, like I said, it's one of those fundamental rights that are enshrined in the Constitution, the right not to be, not to be tortured. So it's not the new normal, and it shouldn't be the new normal. I think what comforts me about this particular discussion is that it's the few people that are being subjected to this, right? Okay. When it happens, there is a discussion about it. And that discussion is actually based in context, because there are those of us who witnessed this, like I mentioned before, before the 1995 Constitution. Okay, and it would be most unfortunate if we found ourselves going back to the level where it was almost accepted. The mere fact that we're having this discussion means that it is not accepted, and that people should not sit back, but they should constantly be vigilant about enforcing their rights. Now, that is why we have these institutions. My sister here in her speech is saying, what institutions? Those institutions are there, okay? And as long as those institutions remain, a day and time will come when the people who have defied those institutions will be brought to book. And they should be brought to book, because we are under a constitutional order. We all have our roles to play in society, okay? A society that has got that aspires to a certain standard, okay, both economically, socially, and politically, right? And this aspect, okay, is a very important one about how institutions, right, relate with each other and should be cooperating with each other to foster that vision, that ideal, okay, of a democratic society in Uganda, which is a necessary prerequisite for development. Now, the powers that be, and these individuals must understand that in order to achieve that development, right, this is one of those prerequisites which must be respected. Which foreign investor is going to come into this country when there's that
atmosphere?
That atmosphere, right? Because that atmosphere, once it's created, means that it's likely to lead to instability. Money does not like instability. Now that's what these people must realize. Your salaries, those people who are in service, your salaries are paid by those of us in the private sector that pay taxes. Okay? Those salaries are paid by investors that come in and eventually pay taxes. Once those investors now, once you create an atmosphere where investors are going to shun our society because they are not very sure about the security of the investment, then it becomes counterproductive. Okay, so there are many moving parts. And that's why, right? I think we should first the respect of institutions. Okay, starts with us. We respect those institutions. We do not denigrate them, so that those people that disrespect them, right, take a leaf from us. And those people that disrespect them get to know that we shall continuously, okay, go to these institutions to ensure that they work to protect the interests of the citizen, or the citizen goes to those institutions to seek protection. Okay, so yes, she's right. All this was playing out, and it was extremely disappointing when you found that institutions orders and recommendations were not being met. But eventually they were complied with. But that shows you that whoever was acting contrary to the orders of an institution like court, contrary to the orders of requests, in fact orders of a body like the Human Rights Commission, which is an institution that is established by the Constitution, by the way, okay? It shows that that person or those persons must sit back and reflect on their actions. And they must know, in fact in this instance, they must know that they are now in the light and that they are culpable to prosecution for the actions that they did in not respecting these institutions. And that's where I to a certain extent agree with my sister here, Sarah, that government must come out firmly, okay, to bring to book the individuals that sought to undermine the authority of these institutions. After all, those institutions, okay, have been established by the people of Uganda through the Constitution.
Ms. Sarah, I'll come back to you. Mr. Kihika has mentioned something very interesting about investors kind of fearing to come and invest in the country because of the atmosphere that probably might cause instability. We've had before talks about encouraging citizens of Uganda not to talk about such issues of torture, etc., because we shall discourage investors to come into the country. Do you think we are giving priority to investment instead of the human rights?
So somebody is telling you to keep quiet and die quietly because they want money to come in the country. Is there more value in life than a human value? Is money more valuable than people? I don't think so. Just a few weeks ago, 6 billion shillings was spent relaunching the image of Uganda, relaunching the PAL, that's what it was called. Relaunching the PAL.
Uganda.
Yes. The tour operators protested, calling it a wastage of money, and indeed it was an outright wastage of money. Even if this torture was not happening, it was a wastage of money for an economy coming out of a pandemic. Spend 6 billion, more than the money you are investing in the sector to recover. And you are partying at Kororo. Then after that, you torture people. And you are directly involved. Not that you're the one holding the whip. You are the commanding chief. The person is suspected of annoying you and your family members. I think that would even be a point to say, let courts deal with him. The person is tortured. You know, the violations against Kakwenza are not just torture. Man of arrest. He tweeted about it before his phones were taken. Man of arrest violates Article 23 of the Constitution. Detained in ungazetted areas. Beyond 48 hours, the whole Article 28 was violated. Then tortured Article 24. Even after he was granted bail, and bail conditions were met, kidnapped by the military, spent a night in Makinde. You are a commanding chief. If you mean well against torture, we know where Kakwenza was tortured. Take a simple action. And for citizens out there, never read the lips of leaders. Never listen to what they say. Watch their action.
Action speaks
louder than words. Never be hoodwinked by words.
Sarah, you have been in court over multiple civic space issues. What does the law say about charging tortured suspects?
The courts have inherent jurisdiction to determine whether constitutional rights were violated or not. We have a constitutional decision to say when like witness is extracted during confessions extracted during torture, or if somebody's rights were violated, then the trial does not stand. We don't have an express provision in the law.
Yeah.
So the courts are expected to exercise their inherent powers to determine whether they should go on with a trial or not. During the Arua fracas, when people were produced in court, breeding, especially women who were breeding and what, the outgoing Chief Justice, the former Chief Justice, Bat Katurevi, made a directive to courts. One was to grant bail to people who were non-cash, to people who were violated, who were involved in that arrest in Arua, but also not to try, not to allow anybody tortured to take plea. Whether the current Chief Justice sees things in the same light, that is, he's now the head of judiciary.
Yeah.
And we wait to see what he does.
Well,
but that is, the courts have that inherent power.
Well, we are running out of time, but I'll give Mr. Oscar Kihika, what's the way forward in a few seconds? What do you think should be done?
No, the way forward is very, very simple. And I think I've said this and I'm going to just reiterate it.
Yeah.
The law is very clear. The institutions that are supposed to implement the law are in place with regard to human rights issues, and particularly with regard to torture. The way forward is simple. That those in charge of those institutions where people or suspects are handled must comply with the law in place. People have got rights. Even though they are suspected of having committed crimes, there are manuals on how they are supposed to be handled. Okay, and please, the people that